All right. Well, welcome again, everybody. My name is Virginia Kane, and I'm one of the editors-in-chief of Sunset Press. And on behalf of the entirety of our student-run publishing press here at Kenyon, we're really excited to welcome you all to the second event in our spring reading series, An Evening with the One and Only Claire Schwartz. It's really incredible to have such a lovely assortment of people across all parts of the Kenyon community here tonight to listen to some poetry. Kind of on the edge or the eve of National Poetry Month. And we're just really grateful that you all took the time out of your week to be here with us tonight. And we hope that this reading and conversation will give you all some inspiration going into the coming weeks as we reach the end of the semester. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the event over to Elon, who is one of our incredible poets writing for Sunset Press this year. They're going to be releasing a collection this upcoming spring. And there's so much of the reason that we were able to bring Claire tonight, just based on their own inspiration from her. So Elon, please feel free to go ahead.
Hey everyone, can you all hear me okay? Okay, my name is Elon. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a sophomore at Kenyon and one of the Sunset writers this year. And I am so thrilled to introduce Claire Schwartz. Claire is the author of the limited edition chapbook Bound, winner of the 2016 Button Poetry Prize, and the forthcoming full-length collection Civil Service, which will be out on Grey Wolf Press, I believe August 2nd. She has taught at Yale University, Wesleyan University, and the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, and holds a PhD in African American Studies, and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies from Yale. She is the culture editor for Jewish Currents and has poems, reviews, interviews, and essays published in The Nation, The Believer, The New Yorker, Poetry Online, Virginia Quarterly Review, our very own Kenyon Review, and elsewhere. It's difficult to articulate my relationship with Claire's work, but one word that comes to mind to describe the impact it has had on me is transformative. I first encountered Claire's work through the poet Zaina El-Sous, who borrowed a line from Claire's poem Birds for the title of her poem Classification is a Country. This line is emblematic of the way that Claire uses poetry to challenge taxonomies, borders, and other demarcations that categorize and divide us and limit our imaginations of what collective freedom can look like beyond the boundaries of capital and empire. Speaking of divisions, it was in Claire's work that I first saw the word machitza in a poem, which is a word that has tremendous personal resonance for me and is the title of the project I've been working on with Sunset this year.
Are you like in class when I was like, who wants to take this question that AJ asked?
Yeah, so Claire's poems unsettle civility by turning our gaze away from the spectacle of violence and toward the quotidian, the everyday rote maintenance of fascism. Her work is also marked by an insistence on meaning as collaboratively constructed. As readers and listeners, Claire offers us an active role in shaping the meaning of her work, as made clear in one of the epigraphs for Civil Service that Claire shared on Twitter a few weeks ago, a line from Edmund Jabet that reads, the writer steps aside for the work and the work depends on the reader. In the poem Lecture on the History of the House, one of the poems from Civil Service that has already been published online and a personal favorite of mine, Claire tells us that poetry is productive of the unknown and that poetry is a door without a house. So I hope you're all as excited as I am, and please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Claire Schwartz.
Orderly conduct. Who wrung your hands, who wrung up your lacy underwear, who tailored your tongue, who danced for the patron, who didn't masturbate for 40 days, who detonated the bath bomb, whose free 2-day shipping, whose pomp and imposter syndrome, whose hearts and minds, who applauded the veterans boarding the plane, who hate read the article, whose title increased, whose art war makes, who took the meeting anyway, whose question was really more of a comment, whose difference of opinion, whose yard sign believed in love, whose kitchen was furnished with tiles from a bathhouse, who brunched about thread count, whose good deed goes. Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here. And Ilan, thank you so much for that introduction, which I feel like I can't really live up to, but I feel like it's a really generous welcome and a wide space to move in. And so thank you for that. And thank you to Virginia and Benjamin and everyone at Sunset Press for having me. I'm really moved by the work you're doing, and also just to all of you for being here. I know there are any number of ways you could spend this evening, so it's not a small thing to gather, and I appreciate it. As Ilan mentioned, I am going to be reading from my forthcoming collection, Civil Service, which is out in August, and Civil Service charts rising fascisms as they register non-spectacularly in the ordinary lives of a fictional set of bureaucrats. When crisis happens,
Except something crazy happened to me.
but rises up from the ongoing state of catastrophe that is imperialism, anti-Blackness, settler colonialism, anti-indigeneity, we're often told where to look, which is at the person bleeding on the street, sometimes perhaps to the person holding a gun, and not as much to the people in boardrooms who's profiting from the endless manufacturing of weapons, not as much to the gated lives of those who have a stake in eternal war. So writing this book was really an attempt for me to ask myself, how would I need to see otherwise? And what would I need to do to reorganize my own thought to recognize the roots of catastrophe rather than just be endlessly responding to the flash of emergency? So that's just a little bit of kind of contextualizing information. I'll keep this brief, and I'm excited to have a conversation after reading. But just one more note is that I'm going to be reading 2 lecture poems, and in the lecture poems there is a fugitive presence called Amira, and in the book Amira's voice kind of runs down the right-hand margin. The poems really aren't supposed to be read by one person, but I'll just raise my hand to indicate that I'm going to be speaking in the world of Amira, which I guess is also just to say, when I raise my hand, it's kind of a placeholder for a world that permits a different kind of gathering. Apples. The townspeople paste wax apples on the trees, glow shyly out their windows as the dictator struts past the monument of his father strutting past nothing at all. Yesterday, the dictator dressed the butcher's boy in the uniform of his own son. Today, at the orders of the dictator, guards shot the boy. In the town of his childhood, the curator is a tourist. He touches his mother with the language with which he does not touch his work. In the painting, bored Eve chomps on an apple. In the tongue of his work, he acquires her. At the banquet, music wrung from the townspeople's anguish, pigs choked with apples. The meat in the soup is human meat. The dictator's rings are made of gold, yanked from the teeth of corpses. The censor bloats with what he knows. His sons bloom in neat rows. An orchard grows inside his wife. He prunes her on Sundays. Under the earth, the butcher's boy, laughing, eats an apple. The core rises, light with rot. The dictator admires the fruit of his land. Preferential treatment. The censor uses the black crayon to eradicate sex. On payday, he takes his wife and son to Shake Shack. Whatever you want, the censor says to his wife when she asks what she should have. The censor crosses provide for your family off the list he keeps tucked in his billfold. To track the time, the censor sings, "You are my sunshine," twice, while his son brushes his teeth. The boy shows the glass his shining mouth stones and growls. He is a bear. No, he is a boy. In the boy's drawings, the zebras are purple and white. His mother hangs them on the fridge. What beautiful horses, the censor says. His wife's wit trembles, then ebbs. The children's nails are clogged with black wax. Object lesson. You learn to recognize beauty by its frame. In the gilded hall, in the gilded frame, her milky neck extended as she peers over the drawn bath. A target, a study, a class. To be beautiful, she requires you. You should save her, no matter the price. No matter the price, the curator will take it. Acquisition makes him good. He hangs the woman's image where school children stand before it, anointed with lessons in color and feeling. Pay attention, the teacher scolds the fidgeter in back. Bad, the child whose movement dilates her own beauty, the child whose wails call to his mother, most beautiful of all. Eyes this way, the teacher syrups. All that grows rots. Good little stillnesses, guardians to be. If you are good, one day an embossed invitation will arrive at the door of the house you own. You will sit next to the curator, light chattering along the chandeliers, your napkin shaped like a swan. To protect your neck, you snap. To protect your silk, you snap its neck with flourish. The blood, beautiful, reddening your cheeks as you slip into the chair drawn just for you. Sit, the chair says to the patron. Stand, to the guard. The guard shifts on blistered feet. She loves you. She loves you not. The children pluck the daisy bald, discard their little sons in the gutter. Minuet. It is snowing. It was snowing. It is snowing still. The snow stills the day's little dramas. The snow covers lightly, is light. The days are little, largely night. Where were dramas of light, now only snow. Out there, a room, we are all inside. Stilled the now presses, blanketing us like snow. The room is a past. It contains only a blanket. The now is a song, passing like light. The room was a world. You were once contained, singing. When the room warms, will you still sing the snow? The world was, once is, will be our light. And you passing through lightly like snow. It was not warm. It is days past night. The dictator signs the form, and a woman is disappeared into the past. Lecture on confessional poetry. Father, she wrote, and so became beautiful. To confess is to offer the territory of your elsewhere to the dictator's compass. Wave the red flag of your interior. The army stations around its perimeter. Cops populate their websites with headshots. Call it good. Amira is not good. Is. If you know something, call. If you see something, say. The grid of reason makes you mad. Your saying makes you seen. You come to your senses like you come home to a 2-car garage. You live in the attic, but don't burn down the house. Was your candle the dream of a greater kindling? Was your poem? On TV, the war is on. The war is off somewhere far away. Your feelings squat in the distance between you and the war. The distance between you and the war is your country. The war is your country. You think of this as nuance. That you think about the war makes you human. To be human is to endow lines with meaning and make others susceptible. Scrap of flag, square of quilt. You tease your thought into a nest. You move into your head. It's a perfectly good attic. You've never felt more at home. You seal your letters, send them off. This is your war effort. This is your poem. I read between your lines. Centuries of study have not yielded a poem's definition. Thank God. Which came first, the nation or the flag? Oh, Father. All over the country, volunteers gather to stuff good words with newsprint. The intern helps for an hour, then takes off, her pockets bulging with pilfered language. If you need to find the intern, follow the trail of stuffed words. To confess is to set yourself out to be destroyed. Attached as you are to your own innocence, you will die to preserve it. A bad deed built a state. A congregation assembles at the edges, red composing your cheeks, a herd of mouths waterlogged by wanting what they will not name. Unhusbanded, you could be anybody's bride. Men change your name with their limited mouths. From now on, answer to that. At the DMV, at the church, at the airport, at the accountant's office, at the pharmacy, the guards looping cursive, pristine. You know the script. When asked what you've done, you find it hard to account for yourself. You account for yourself. You were there. Then you were less. If you can't perceive me, does that mean I'm not here? Which came first, her whiteness or the soldiers? If she forgives her father in language, forgive her father. If in language she does not forgive her father, forgive her. To name yourself is not to declare your innocence. To name yourself is to commit to the task of your exoneration. The name is the guilt. Death cleanses the name. Your funeral is exquisite. Linen tablecloths, lilies. You thought of everything. Attention. The light instruments. Camera. Gun. Cliche. Cliche. The sound the camera makes in shooting you. A mirror doused in darkness. You send your image to your lover who presses his body close to another. The body requires a name for admission. A border disrupts a name. A name change is a border crossing. The name increases. The body is cast aside. Look how you've recast the body in language so as not to lose what you've destroyed. Look how you've made language a monument to your destruction and called it memory. Taken as you were into so many mouths, you became the anthem. Language is the perimeter of the interior. Confessing, you fence yourself in. You yard the woods of your elsewhere. Inside, pronounless, then yoked to you. Now that you are the I's guardian. I is you, is not. A thief, thinned with the death wish. You, elsewhere, waving the white flag. We wear your hair in a locket, covet your fingernails in an ivory box. The heirloom of you makes us we, if not hunted. Only the living can be so stingy with form. There is imagination. The seed dreamt it up, rattled your glass core and world word shard, the word instrument to sift the dead through the narrow frame of your intelligence, to pluck a word and give it to you, without which, not you, without which, magic. You know where you buried you, then you lose track, go looking, conscripted by her breath's thin draft, conscripted by its absence. Graveyard shift. When the soldier went to war, he wanted to go home. He wrote a letter to his mother, which the mailman carried over the mountain into the censor's office. Dear mother, his mother read, I hope you are missing. I know I am something beautiful, ruined, your son. Of course, she understood. The doctors concocted nostalgia. The poets dreamt up modernity. The mothers went on understanding. When the soldier occupied his mother, she sang a folk song to her belly. He kicked. She called it dancing. Late one night, something was born. I will just read one more lecture and then we can have a conversation. Thanks for listening. Lecture on loneliness. The first woman was not burdened with firsts, only was, not yet bound by a name, uncalled for. Only history makes her lonely, only after makes her first. Of course, this is an origin story, lonely as any birth. Loneliness, the distance between history and what history might have been. The thread unspools, the umbilical severed. Why do your books clog the doorway to the past? A blanket of yellow petals. The rain, little fists beating back the dead who want only to braid your hair. You built a world against such softness. You arranged an alphabet against loneliness. I scale your walls. That is my practice. In the schools, children line up, chant, to be, alone, among, to be, without, among, to be, among, without, to be, without, alone, to trade your wonder for knowing, gladly, to confuse the loss of nothing with the loss of nothing. You knew, then you knew more. You diminished the world with your knowing. The distance between you and your quiet grows, a ladder receding into the sky. The first woman of your life stitches her face into your sleep like your grandmother stitched coins into the lining of her coat and ran. You wake, run through the woods, jingling. The sound of your skirt accompanies you. You forget your sisters. You make of the hour a horse, ride off. I've ridden those horses, your lost hours. The children lick honey from the letters. The righteous man climbs the tree. On the first branch, he cuts off his hair. At the top, he discards his body. A person can be with a word like they can be with a body. Wash it, accompany it, be changed by its nearness. The woman lays all the lavender at your feet. The brown fields balk. You scatter flowers along the sidewalks, paint a mural of a rainforest in a prison. The years ascend the mirror like sea level. A face breaks off like an iceberg. It is your mother's. The years add, the years subtract. You are always wrong. Take me with you. You populate your memory with your scent and her language. You remember so little. You are in bed, in a room down the hall, words exchanged in the dark. Distance sands the words to noise. The room is the world. 3 daffodils later, and you've shed your memory like a skin. No matter how much you water it, the stone refuses its flowering. You strike the stone. It withholds the river. The letters are lanterns and lead to no house. The townspeople emptied their language and could no longer meet each other there. Was the language empty, or was it open? The truth lost its coordinates. A weathered man, dusting snow from the ridge of his year. The name of an old lover assails him. No, the light hurts. He closes her name like a book. If you excise me from your memory, I will enter your blood. Little capillaries, little trees, little heart governed by a solitary rain cloud. The only laws: be radiant, be heavy, be green. Tonight, the dead light up your mind, like an image of your mind on a scientist's screen. The scientists don't know, and too much. In the town square, in the heart of night, a delicacy like the heart of an artichoke. A man dances cheek to cheek with the infinite blue. Of course, his mother's death blooms so much larger in his life than her life ever did. An endless flowering what is gone, scant still against what will never be. No language for the engulfing mouths of the not become. After you, no one asks. Look how you've shredded the quiet with your promises. Look how you lost her anyway. Look now, no quiet to accompany you. Your words are sisterless. No, no one asks after you. I am the one who is asking. A finger plumbing the depths of your night. It rained in your room. You mistook the ceiling for sky. The rain allots you just one glass. It has to last your life. The rain extinguishes summer. You behead the flowers. You forget their names. To share what you love with one you admire and be scorned. Fingernails along your innermost parts. Every embrace, a rehearsal of separation. Your mother's life halved like a peach, the stubborn pit exposed to weather. One morning, in a shop, you meet someone who wears your hair, who speaks your name like the one who named you. The bells on the door clink as you leave with your butter. To be suspended between oneself, like the man who balanced on a wire between mountains, then tumbled to death like a helicopter seed. A burial is a seed planted in the wrong season. to be the wrong season, to work all your life in the name of family, each labored hour a brick in the road leading you away. A name is not a leash. I will be in the field watching the tulips grow. The women come with aprons full of hours. The world aches, unpassed over by the eyes of the dead. The dead have no eyes. Lonely, lonely living. Do all of your antics recover the radiance? And was it worth it? Go on, hang the stars from the sky. The world is a pageant of your making. The hour of forgetting is a brown hour. The house of forgetting looks like any other. The trees are dark and full of language. The trees speak, but not to you. First, the year without music. Then, in a minor key, in a dead language, the woman sang this song. We were the last people on earth. We made a world between us. We spent the earth. I made my body a cloak and took you in. In all that you, I lost myself. I traveled the length of my interior and there I wasn't. My language was a symptom of a history I couldn't touch. I petitioned the dead for company. No one came. The butterflies fell like autumn leaves. The shells washed up on the beach, empty as God's ears. We were the last. I called this life. Here, a door, and like that, we went. Thanks. I'll stop there and hopefully we can have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Claire. Everybody please join me in a round of applause or virtual applause. Wow, yeah, I'm speechless. That was really remarkable. Thank you for sharing so generously and so honestly and just so brilliantly. Yeah, so I guess we'll transition back over to Iman, who will be leading our Q&A. And in terms of how that's going to work, people can just use the raise hand function to kind of signal that they're up next, or they can put questions in the chat, whatever you all are more comfortable with, and Elon will sort of figure out the order of all of that. But yeah, thank you all again for being here and for sharing your evening with us. And thank you so much, Claire. That was really special. So thank you.
Thank you so, so much, Claire. That was really beautiful. So glad to hear some poems that I haven't heard or read before from your upcoming collection. That's really exciting. I guess I wanted to start, if I can, the Q&A with a question of my own. And I think I wanted to ask you about sort of the genesis for this concept of civil service, and in particular, the sort of cast of fictional bureaucrats that are explored in your poems, from the accountant to the butcher and so on. And also those sort of the people whose names are their occupations, in contrast to this sort of fugitive who, as I understand it, runs down the right-hand margin of the page, Amira, and how these characters came to you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Let's see. So, I don't know, in certain ways, this is sort of the beginning of my starting to talk about this collection in the world. And in some ways, I feel like you're getting me at a really honest moment where the seams of assembling this into sort of a narrative that feels cohesive are probably still really visible because, you know, of course, this is a bound thing, but it didn't come to me in that form. So yeah, thanks for bearing with, but also that feels like the more honest thing. So I'm glad to be able to chat in that mode. This started, I think, in earnest around 2012, 2013, 2014, when I was in a PhD program and preparing for my oral exams. And basically what you have to do is just like read hundreds of books and then pretend that you know everything. And the kind of guidance around the language of mastery, around, you know, if someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer, you're supposed to kind of reroute into something that you know, to just perform. It's like a really intense performance of knowledge. And so this in some ways was kind of the secretion of that process. These poems kind of became all of the place where I could really put my questions and not have to marshal the questions into any space of knowing, but just allow the questions to take whatever form to kind of build into enlarging the question space. So that was sort of one way. I think the other part of it is that I was in grad school at Yale, which has a really horrific relationship to the surrounding communities. I heard Fred Moten talk one time about NYU, which I think is, you know, kind of similarly placed in a lot of ways. And he said, you know, who do we think of when we talk about the university community? Do we think of the people who have been displaced by the university as part of our community? You know, sort of like how do we understand the we of this place? And, you know, what do we think about as the kind of accountabilities of our language and our action? And how do the kind of shifting contours of the we change those questions? So I think sorry, this is all very rambly, but we used to get these emails about crime on campus. And it would tell you if like someone had been robbed, you know, that kind of thing. And it just felt obscene. Like the kind of violence that Yale as an institution was doing there was no form to register that. And so I think in some ways this just became a form to kind of think those questions through and their intersections. If I didn't answer, you can like re-ask, whatever.
No, thank you so much for that, and feels super, super resonant to, you know, our own situation at Kenyon, and sort of, I guess, the contradictions of academia. But yeah, if anyone else has a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. I see that someone asked what the title of that poem is, but I don't know what poem. But I'm happy to repeat the title of anything.
I think it may have been one of your lecture poems, but I'm not entirely sure. I think it was during that series.
Okay. The lecture poems are lecture. This is one of them. I don't know if this one is.
If no one has a question, I can continue to keep the ball rolling. Yeah, I guess, Claire, you've obviously been in a lot of academic spaces, either as a student, as a teacher, and I think as like people who are all at Kenyon right now and kind of in this student role, but maybe on the cusp of continuing education or beginning to go out into the world or teach, like we're often really inundated with all these different pieces of advice about how to write, how to be a writer, how to be an academic, how to really just be in so many different forms. And so one of the things I think a lot about on the note of contradiction is just how often that advice can be just completely like oversaturating and also simultaneously confusing to sift through. And it can depend so much on who a person is and their own positionality when it comes to like what they're going to be saying, and whether or not that advice would be applicable. So I was wondering if you could share maybe both like one of the best pieces of advice you've gotten, maybe it's as a poet or for a poet, maybe it's, you know, as a scholar, as an activist, one of your many hats, but maybe more focused on writing, and maybe alongside like a piece of advice that you received that was one of the worst or has just been unrealistic or unhelpful. If you have either of those off the top of your head or need some time to think about it, that would be wonderful. Because I think there's like maybe not enough conversation about how we don't always maybe need to take everything at face value, and maybe the skills that are required in order to kind of think critically about what is or isn't applicable given somebody's circumstances, or just given the fact that we're in a poetry climate that is always evolving and rapidly shifting.
Yeah, that feels really resonant. I'm scared to, give any advice because, as you said, everything feels very contingent. In general, I love getting advice. I feel like my relationship to advice is, it's like sometimes helpful to have a form to stand in just to measure your own reaction to something. But I think what I hope, whatever I say, well, I'm also just stalling, trying to think of something. Whatever I say will just, feel as resonant as it resonates with each of you differently. It's a good question. I feel like I would have to think to say the best, but something I really hold on to is a teacher, a professor of mine in grad school, Elizabeth Alexander, who is a poet, but also a scholar, kind of more traditional literary scholar, told me that just never to confuse writing with publishing. And I feel like that's something I really hold on to, that often when people talk about success and work, that there's kind of some slippage between, conventional markers of how success is being held in the world, that even when we talk about sometimes like being afraid to write something, often there's slippage between being afraid to actually write something and being afraid to move it in particular ways in the world. And I just think like the more space you can hold between those things, there's just freedom feels a little extreme, but I don't know, there's just a permission to kind of work out the thought with a different circumference that I really value. So I try to, publishing comes really late for me. I write a lot more than I publish, and I write slowly and try to just hold space between those things. So that's been really valuable. Bad advice, there's like infinite amounts of bad advice. I don't think it's exactly bad advice, but I will say I feel like I've been in a lot of circumstances where not quitting has been sort of privileged above everything else. And I have a lot of friends who are leaving academia. I left academia and I feel awesome. So I feel like, I think it's the same advice actually, just like not allowing these systems that we all live inside and have to navigate in different ways to be the kind of totalizing sum of the compass of our lives. Those are, maybe just flip sides of the same coin.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that really resonates.
I'm also curious, like what y'all are working on and like what questions are, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask you questions, but like what questions are feeling alive to you in your work and writing. And
Speaking for myself, I'm in a nonfiction writing class for the first time in my life, and that's been so eye-opening because it's led to these really incredible discussions about like truth. Ira Sook-Grong is our professor here, teaches most of our nonfiction classes, and he's really into kind of interrogating the idea that like once something is being written about, you're never going to tell it accurately. And I think like it's really interesting to kind of go beyond that obsession that we often have with like a singular truth or a perfect memory that remains intact, and just how it doesn't always allow for, the separation between the writer in the moment and the writer at the desk, and how that is maybe how we process memory and how we then use those memories to inform so much of how we continue on through the world. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and I think my poetry background is helping me in that sense, because poets are kind of used to being a little bit shady with the truth. They're stretching it or creating alternate truths and things like that. So it's been interesting to kind of reach that same conclusion, but from a very different lens and in a genre where I didn't think that was allowed. Like I think I just kind of thought that memoirists or fiction or nonfiction writers were like just had better memories than I did, when in reality it's just sort of a whole different animal. So I'm curious if other people are thinking about that in their writing.
I'll just say that feels very alive to me. I think about truth and the construction of fact all the time. And I think what you're saying about poetry as a space where, it's something that lives not in this distinction between fiction and nonfiction, the idea of poetic truth, but also I think there's something of like, how do you kind of bring something into being? Like Audre Lorde talks about poetry as giving name to the nameless so it can be thought. It's like, what are the kind of creative possibilities of language? And I think, I don't know, I've recently been thinking about the fact as a kind of socially conservative mode, because it sort of requires being checked to get something that already exists in the world. And obviously I'm not like anti-science or something, but I do feel like there's a kind of coexistence of multiple modes of truth. And yeah, there is something about like the creative possibilities of language, or language bringing a world into being that can't be accommodated by those facts, those ideas of facts that can be sort of externally verified by existing forms.
If I can say something else, I've been thinking a lot about, and I think this kind of leads into another question that I have for you. I've been thinking a lot about, I guess because I'm writing a chapbook with some, but about audience, and about what it means to like make a poem accessible to everyone, especially when it comes to like, I've been exploring like incorporating like Yiddish and Hebrew into my poems, just because of my personal relationships with both of those languages, but also knowing that, I'm not interested in like only writing for people who would be able to access those languages. And I think it kind of made me think about, and this might be a really big generalization, but a kind of maybe shift in your work from bound to like the more recent stuff, sort of where at least I unfortunately never got a copy, but I guess some of your earlier cultic references and using words versus like, I mean, obviously still no poetry is accessible to everyone, still writing in English, but towards maybe a more, I don't want to say general, but like, there's not as specific reference to like specific places or languages or traditions in like the work that you've shared tonight. So yeah, I don't know how to perfectly put that into a question, but I guess I'm just wondering what you think about the value of, of writing that is like culturally specific, writing that is maybe more widely accepted.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think you're making me think about my own work, because I think actually the way that I relate to that shift is that I think because I am so slow to publish, and actually even to share work with like my 5 trusted reader friends, I really understand myself to be the first audience of my work. And so I think Bound in so many ways was writing the book that I needed to, that I wish a younger version of myself had had. I needed to kind of decouple Judaism from Zionism. I needed to decouple my relationship to Hebrew from Zionism. I needed, so I think that was kind of the work that I had to do. And once I did that work, I didn't need to do it again. But I think there's also a kind of, I don't know, there's like a question for me about where specificity is recognized, because there is a kind of, I don't know, like capaciousness to the language of empire. Empire sort of takes and metabolizes cultural specificities in a way that also, I think, produces this idea of accessibility when we're talking about language that's readily accessible to empire. But I also do want to say, like, that's also a specific vernacular, even if it's not recognized as such. And I think part of what I'm interested in doing in this project is situating that language as specific and refusing to universalize it. I think, you know, in so many ways, it's just as specific as any other language that anyone has made a life in. So I actually like see these projects as sort of continuous in a way, even though I think you're right to like point to differences. It's like a little hard to say in the abstract, but I'd be really curious to hear, like, in particular, what you're navigating with your work, or how you're thinking about audience. I don't want to like turn this back on you, but just in general, like, I am curious, like, particular moments that you feel like those questions are coming up.
Yeah, I mean, for me at least, that's also in thinking through like Zionist indoctrination, and thinking through also, like you said, decoupling Jewishness from Zionism. But I don't know that I'm so interested in decoupling it personally, because that's been so much of my experience. So I'm interested in asking, like, more like how we got here. Why is this so central to this community? But yeah, I really don't want to take up too much space. So if anybody else has a question, please put it in the chat or raise your hand.
Oh, also thank you, Holly, for the comment, because I feel like, yeah, that's also a really important register of truth, is truth with the self. So thank you for that reframing.
If nobody has any remaining questions, I would love to just ask Claire to share where we can find you online, and maybe what to keep our radars on in terms of your upcoming release dates, projects, maybe additional readings or other opportunities to continue to engage with your work and connect with you.
Yeah, thanks. You can find me on Twitter at 23C Schwartz, which is like an aggressively uncatchy handle. And my website is claireschwartz.net, or just Google. Although there is another Claire Schwartz who's unfortunately a real estate agent in Florida, so I don't take responsibility for her.
We'll find the right Twitter handle. Yes, well, thank you so much again. On behalf of all of Sunset Press, we're really grateful for this hour that we got to spend with you, and we're so looking forward to continuing to follow your work. I also want to alert everybody to our upcoming events in the Sunset Press reading series. Next Thursday at the same time, Hala Ayan will be reading, and then 2 weeks from then, on April 14th at about 8 p.m., I believe, Natalie Wee will be reading. And so keep your eyes out for those announcements and just continue to join us. It's been wonderful to have you all here tonight. Lon, do you have anything else to say?
No, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Claire, and everyone. Yeah, this was really incredible. And I'm really looking forward to reading all of Civil Service and being able to just like hold it in my hand and experience it as like a full collection. And congratulations on that coming out this August.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Virginia and Ron, for, yeah, it's really nice to talk to all of you.
Have a good night, everyone.